Well, can I start by welcoming everyone who is joining us? Thank you for coming today to the first National Town Hall and the launch of Democracy Counts campaign. It's a campaign that's seeking to renew democracy in Australia. Incredibly important initiative, and we're so thrilled that you are with us. For those that don't know me, I'm Mike Baird, the CEO of McKinnon, and I'm joined here today from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I'm just so thrilled that you are here. This is a campaign we're very excited about. It is an opportunity, we think, to change Australia, to listen to what people and communities are saying, and that is they love democracy, but they're not quite sure it's working, and that's where we step in. So we're so appreciative to join so many organisations that have done such important work in this space. And I want to thank each and every one of them for the work you've done to date, and just as importantly, the work we're going to do collectively together. We've been thinking about this for about 12 months, and I should acknowledge Jay Weatherall, who started this process a long time ago. He's joined us. But the team led by Tom here at McKinnon, working with all the organisations. It's been a long sort of period to get here, but very excited by what comes ahead. Our hope is that in collaboration with the sector, we're able to work and amplify and renew democracy. A big aspiration, but one we're very confident and excited about. We've got some very important guests. Her Excellency is here. We're so honoured to have her. She'll speak shortly, and many others. Thank you for attending. But before we get started, Benson Solo is going to acknowledge country. He is one of Australia's most recognised First Nation leaders, and I'll pass it across to him. Thank you so much, Benson.
Thank you very much, Mike, and it's such an honour to be here today, and just want to acknowledge the country that I'm calling in from. I'm calling in from Bunurong, which is in Elwood here, in Melbourne, on one of the Kulin Nations, and just want to acknowledge all the countries that you're all dialing in from. We are such a unique country. We are a nation made up of over 250 language groups, and with their unique cultures, as well as unique governance and structural systems as well. I actually particularly wanted to make reference to the artwork that I'm sitting in front of today. It's by a wonderful artist named Stan Yaramunya, who's a Yorta Yorta artist, which is around Shepparton area for those playing at home. And this particular artwork is called Cleansing the Land, and it reminds us of the uniqueness of the Australian landscape and the seasons that it goes through in its motion of renewal. It is a lands of floods, of fires, and also of droughts. And what's unique about that in the Australian context is actually for rebirth and regrowth to take place, it actually needs all these elements together. Not only do they lead to new green shoots and opportunity and optimism, but it also strengthens and it signals for new beginnings as well. And the reason why I wanted to raise that today is because I think it draws direct comparison to the wonderful campaign that's being launched today, Count Me In, and it's coming at such a critical time in the Australia's history and Australia's continual strive to strengthen our democracy when we know that trust in institutions is waning, and democracy and civic service is under increasing scrutiny. And I look to the artwork behind me, but I also look to my own people, which are connected to the Wemba Wemba, Jadawajali, Wirragai, and Gunditjmara nations, as well as New Ireland Province in Papua New Guinea. And I'm reminded that in times of turmoil, in times of renewal, that we can often look to our past to better see the future. And it's actually with that I deeply acknowledge and recognise the wonderful elders that have been stewards of our communities, that have been custodians of this land, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Benson. Really appreciate that thoughtful, reflective acknowledgement. Thank you for all you do. I'll now pass across to Tom Mooney, who is leading this campaign for McKinnon, and he'll run the town hall from here. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Mike. And like you, I'm really excited to be here kicking off the Democracy Counts campaign with so many people on the call today. For those who don't know me, I'm Tom. I'm coming to you today from Ngunnawal and Ngambri country. I joined Mackinnon about 7 months ago after many years working in politics at a state and federal level. Most recently, I was Chief of Staff to the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Penny Wong. And when I was thinking about what to do after politics, I reflected on the things that were keeping me up at night. And really, that was the state of our democracy. In the 9 years I was working in and around federal parliament, the standard of debate changed. Increasingly, instead of discussing the issues, too many played the person, not the ball, attacking the moral character of others. I saw increasing threats of violence against our elected officials and their staff and attacks on places of work. I was concerned about the social impact of social media and a declining and concentrated media with increasingly sensationalised content pushing Australians into corners of disagreement. I was worried about the ability of foreign actors to exacerbate division, to undermine our democracy and our security. And like all of you, I could see trust declining. These are the things that kept me up at night, as I imagine they do for many on the call today. But it's this concern that's led me to join Mackinnon and the Democracy Counts campaign, and I'm looking forward to sharing more about what we're all about as a part of the campaign. Before we get into things, just a bit of housekeeping. Firstly, we love to see everyone's faces. It helps us get a real sense of community and atmosphere. So if you're comfortable with it, please leave your camera on. Today's event is being recorded so that we can share it with those who couldn't attend today. The format for the town hall is pretty relaxed and interactive. You'll hear from some preeminent Australians and democracy experts from across the country, and we're really keen to hear from all of you who are joining us. So how are we doing that? Well, today we'll be using an interactive tool for feedback and discussion. You should see a QR code on the screen now. If you scan that using the camera on your phone, it will take you to an interactive tool where you'll be able to actively participate. There's also a link to that website on the chat here on Zoom. So if you don't have your mobile handy, you can click the link on your computer. Once you've got over to the tool, please click on the heart emoji on your screen to let us know that you're in there. You can use the chat here in Zoom for your comments, and we welcome your questions for us and for our panelists there too. I know I don't need to say this to a great group like this, but of course, please make sure all of your comments and questions are respectful. We greatly appreciate your views today, so please jump on and answer the questions when they appear. I think that's all for housekeeping. I'd now like to do something very exciting, and that's to welcome Her Excellency, the Governor-General, Sam Mostyn, to this town hall. Ms. Sam Mostyn commenced her term as Governor-General in 2024. Prior to taking on this appointment, Ms. Mostyn was a businesswoman, community leader, and advocate in many sectors: sport, climate change, the arts, social justice, and gender equality. In Australia's democracy, the Governor-General holds a unique and critical place. Reflecting this position, Ms. Mostyn has made civics education and democracy education a real centrepiece for her role, sharing behind the scenes from her office and inviting everyday Australians into the innermost workings of our democracy. So we're thrilled to have you, Your Excellency, join us today and to share more.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks, Tom, for your very kind introduction and for Mike's opening remarks. And thank you, Benson, for your just simply beautiful acknowledgement of country. It was wonderful to see everyone putting their country up on the chat to see just how broadly representative the group is today. That was beautiful. I want to acknowledge that I'm joining you from the lands of the Camaragal people, and I want to pay my respects to elders past and present, and also acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we're all gathered and the many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are joining online today. Now, there are many of you I would very much like to acknowledge, particularly this morning, friends and colleagues, inspirational thinkers, leaders, respected contributors to this really important public debate, and people with whom I have shared offices, boardrooms, podiums and platforms over many years. But I am conscious that Mackinnon has ensured that there are many conversations moving at a fast clip this morning. So I just want to simply acknowledge all speakers and panellists, and in particular the Honourable Milton Dick MP, Speaker of the House of Representatives, and all the current and former parliamentarians present today, and also acknowledge and thank the team at Mackinnon. This vital and timely work that reflects Australia's relationship and trust in our democratic systems and institution is much, much needed. And to everyone joining online, thank you for your interest in this urgent and critical task of ensuring that our mighty democracy remains a beacon of strength today and very, very long into the future. Now, as many of you know, in my first speech as your Governor-General, I referenced Noel Pearson's framing of our interwoven layers of our history as the pillars of strong, successful and optimistic modern Australia, beginning with 65,000 years of continuous Indigenous culture, always shared with us so kindly and generously, and then our democracy and stable institutions of government, and our recent history of extraordinary success, optimism, belonging and progress made only possible by over a half-century of remarkable multiculturalism. I promised 18 months ago to put care, kindness and respect at the centre of my work, care for each other, care for those who care for others, care for our continent and its environmental riches, care for civics and institutions, and care for the way we discuss the issues of our time without rancour, anger or judgment. Now, increasingly, as the McKinnon research reveals, it is the care for our civics and how we all participate that has taken on a new urgency. And that's why, with my team in the Office of the Governor-General, we've been working hard to share our Constitution and our democracy with all Australians, and sharing widely the role that the Office of the Governor-General actually plays in the stability and certainty of our system, seeking to build understanding and respect for the freedoms, the rights and the responsibilities that we all share as citizens. Now, just last week, I spoke at the Australian Media Literacy Alliance's Summit on media literacy, where the focus was squarely on understanding that our democratic institutions and practices strengthens all of us against misinformation and destabilising influences. In my role, I can share the many aspects of our democracy in speeches, videos, and on social media, and in this forum, and I can draw on our communities in, hosting them here in official residences, as we do with the more than 20,000 school students who visit us each year at Government House in Canberra as part of their civics education, and as I will tomorrow with over 100 Year 11 and 12 students from across the country who are gathering in Canberra for the National Schools Constitutional Convention. It's going to be wonderful. I can also carry the message with me across Australia as I travel to cities, the regions and the bush, everywhere. Most recently, at Hornsby Shire Council's citizenship ceremony, I was proud to welcome 44 new citizens from 19 countries and to share with them the values that unite our communities and the democracy that is the strength of our nation and which they have the privilege to now participate in as active, informed citizens. And earlier this month, during an official regional visit to Darwin, Mount Isa and Cloncurry, I was so delighted to deliver the Museum of Australian Democracy's Democracy in a Box education resource for upper primary students. They were very happy to receive it. So I have the privilege of both a panoramic view of our community and the opportunity to experience our communities in the fine grain. And like many of you, I think it's deeply troubling to see the increased suspicion of our system and the lack of trust and belief in our democracy that the McKinnon research is now showing us. I do see the other narrative. I see and hear from Australians, but particularly young Australians, that they really want a strong and purposeful democracy. Now, that makes me deeply optimistic. But like everyone on the call, I'm not blind to the potential fragility of our system should we choose not to care about it. Thankfully, McKinnon does care. The launch of today's Democracy Counts campaign and the subject of everything we'll talk about today is designed to reflect on the systems, the principles and the institutions that are essential to Australian democracy and the civic literacy we so desperately need to support them. I believe we must engage with these findings and with why Australians do not see so much strength in our democracy. So I'd just like to start today by congratulating McKinnon for its profound and positive contribution to upholding and advancing democracy in our modern Australia, and for everyone online this morning for your dedication to the stability of our democracy and our very important institutions of government. I'm looking forward to continuing to participate in these conversations online, in person, wherever I'm able to do so throughout my term as your Governor-General. And today, I'm really looking forward to hearing everything that we're going to be hearing in the contributions, to thank McKinnon for the work and know that this is a project that we are all deeply committed to. We've got to move from that fragile state to one of great strengths, where people in Australia do what I see when I travel all over the world, and that is hearing from other parts of the world that we are a beacon as a mighty democracy, and we must protect that, but ensure that every Australian feels part of the things that make us strong as a democracy. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, McKinnon, for having me join you today, and really looking forward to hearing all the contributions that will help keep us mighty and strong.
Thanks so much, Your Excellency. I know everyone on this call appreciates the way that you are using your role to engage and educate Australians, but also the way you're centering care, kindness and respect as a part of your work. We're thrilled to have you as part of today's National Town Hall and the campaign launch. It's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Sophie O, one of the co-founders of McKinnon. Sophie and Grant established McKinnon more than a decade ago with a vision to improve our systems of policy making, government and democracy. While Sophie's speaking, we also have a question for the audience for you to answer in the feedback tool. Sophie, over to you to share why you have made democracy central to the McKinnon mission and why you believe in the Democracy Counts campaign.
Thanks, Tom. Good morning, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, and those organisations and individuals who care about how our democracy works. Today has one purpose. It's to launch the Democracy Counts campaign and to begin a shared effort to strengthen something that all of us in this room care deeply about. Democracy is, at its heart, a collective idea. The notion that a country functions best when it draws on the full breadth of its community, diverse experiences, perspectives, and capabilities, working together to build something that creates genuine opportunity for everyone. But it only works when people trust it. Trust is central to democracy. It is what gives democracy its legitimacy. It is the foundation on which the whole endeavour is built. McKinnon's research shows that trust in Australia's key democratic institutions is low and has been declining. That matters, not just as a measure of public sentiment, but because trust is what allows governments to function effectively, to make difficult decisions and plan for the long term and deliver for the people. We are seeing in other countries what happens when that foundation erodes, where politics becomes more polarised, less constructive, and ultimately less capable of delivering for the people. A democracy consumed by division cannot enable opportunity or prosperity. Australia is in a stronger position than many, but we cannot take that for granted. This campaign is a response to the challenge, not because people have given up on democracy, our research suggests they haven't, but because renewal requires deliberate effort, and that effort needs to start somewhere. McKinnon's ambition is not to dictate the shape of Australian democracy, that is for the Australian community to determine. Our goal is to support the excellent work you are all doing by amplifying your impact and together building towards the democratic renewal we all want to see. Ultimately, what Grant and I hope for is a democracy where debate is conducted with respect for different views, where citizens feel genuinely connected to the institutions that shape their lives, and where governments are highly effective in delivering what citizens need. This is what drives us. The challenge is real, but so is the opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks, Sophie. Now, before I introduce our first four panelists, I'm keen to briefly take a look at the responses you shared in the feedback tool on Menti. So we asked you what change to Australia's democracy you want to see in 5 years' time. Civics and citizenship to be taught as a subject in all schools. That's obviously a key feature of the research report that we published today. No more lobby groups or lobbyists. Again, lobbying and vested interest has shown up in our research, and we're proposing reforms in that area. Compulsory voting in our electoral system is constitutionally enshrined and can't be undone through legislation should a far-right government get elected. More politicians, better information and thoughtful, respectful debate. Some good themes coming out here, which is really, really good to see, and also in line with what we're seeing in our research. So that's really heartening. More opportunities for young people to build meaningful relationships in their community and participate in our society. We know that connection is obviously fraying and is crucial to our democracy. So really appreciate the input from all of you. Now, welcome our first 4 panelists. We are really excited that we've already had broad political engagement at this early stage of the campaign. And along with Benson, I'd like to welcome the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Milton Dick, the Federal Member for Indi, Helen Haines, and Senator for Victoria and Shadow Minister for Defence, Senator James Patterson, to join me for a discussion about the current state of Australia's democracy. If you have a question for any of our panelists, please feel free to drop it into the chat. And if you check your device on your second screen, you'll see that we have a question for you. So while we wait for some questions to come through, Mr. Speaker, I might start with you. Most Australians believe we have a strong democracy. We know that from our research, but there are risks, some outside of our control, but many within our control. As Speaker, what do you see as the biggest risks for our democracy?
Well, good morning, Tom, Mike, and the team from McKinnon, and to my parliamentary colleagues, Helen and James. Look, I think it's pretty simple. I think it's 2 things. One, we don't talk about democracy in its purest sense. We talk about a lot of politics in this country, but we don't talk about the strength of democracy. And the second thing is we don't teach democracy enough in our communities. And that sounds a bit weird, speaking from the heart of our democracy in Canberra. But Australia is the 10th oldest democracy in the world, and we're not a particularly old nation. We have 125 years of federation that we're celebrating this year, and it's quite a radical thing at the time when we did federate. But I think the biggest threats to democracy, Tom, straight to your question, are the rise of misinformation and disinformation. Foreign interference is real, and the disinformation campaigns are alive and kicking. So what can we do about it from our end and from, as the Speaker of the House of Representatives? I think we need to use the blueprint that McKinnon has outlined, particularly in the area of teaching civics. Now, all members of Parliament are engaged with their schools and community, but I've taken a personal message to visit now almost 200 schools across regional and remote communities. I've visited the electorate of Indi with Helen Haines, and I've pledged to visit every electorate across Australia. This year, for the first time here at Parliament House, we'll be having our first National Youth Parliament in August. And actually today, as luck would have it, we're launching Parliamentary Friends of Democracy, a tripartisan group that will be launched this afternoon to look at how we as parliamentarians can have a better outreach into the community. But I think we do have a threat on our hands. But I think if we all work together, because of compulsory voting, compulsory preferential voting, the AEC, a free press and our institutions, I think Australia is in better hands when it comes to democracy than others.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, like the Governor-General, we're excited about the way you're using your office and role to engage Australians and to particularly young people on our democracy. Senator Patterson, if I could come to you for your perspective, both as a senator and in your role as Shadow Minister for Defence. We know democratic resilience is a key element of our nation's strength. As well as risks within our country, there are broader factors, international factors. Why is our democratic resilience important for our national security?
Tom, thank you very much for having me, and congratulations to McKinnon, to Sophie and to Grant for what is a great act of philanthropic leadership to be engaged in supporting our democracy. You're right, there are very serious threats to our democracy which come from abroad. There are right now today multiple authoritarian states who are seeking to weaken and divide our democracy, who are seeking to undermine our social cohesion, who are seeking to weaken our sense of shared national identity and unity. And the reason why they do that is because they think the only good democracy is a divided and weak democracy. In addition to those state actors, there are non-state actors who are doing this for other motivations. A lot of the AI slop that you see on social media is generated to enrage people, to engage them for commercial benefit, often including ultimately scamming those people who are victims of that. And this is dangerous for two reasons. As Sophie and other speakers have said, democracies rely on trust in institutions. And if you chip away at the trust in those institutions, you chip away in faith in the whole system. But secondly, democracy is a process of collective decision-making, and collective decision-making about the future of our country relies on a shared understanding of truth. So if you undermine that shared understanding of truth, then it's very difficult to make a decision with any sort of consensus if we all have our own version of reality. I just want to sign one note of caution, though. We have to make sure that the cure in dealing with these very real problems is not worse than the disease. I think Australians are more sensitive to restrictions on their rights and freedoms than they have been for a long time, and that is particularly acute with people who are disillusioned with the political system and disillusioned with the major parties. So if any solution to these problems is perceived to trample on those rights, particularly their rights to free speech and privacy, if it's perceived to be an act of censorship or surveillance, then it will have the opposite of the intended effect. It will deepen their distrust in institutions because they won't see that as an act of defending democracy against external threats. They will see that as the major parties ganging up to block their political competitors. So we have to be really careful when there's very well-intentioned ideas, well-motivated ideas, including, for example, legislating and truth in political advertising. Of course, we should have truth in political advertising. It may not be perceived the same way as it's intended by some of the target audiences, and we have to be mindful of that.
Thank you, Senator. Now, as you've been speaking, we've asked our attendees what they see as the strongest part of our democracy. And we've also had what attendees think is the strongest part of our democracy. Compulsory preferential voting is obviously way out in front, followed by the Independent Electoral Commission, strong institutions, and a free press. Interesting to see such a clear focus on compulsory preferential voting. Again, our research has shown really strong support for that as an element of our democracy and something that keeps our democracy strong. I also have a question from the chat from Max Hardy. We use the term democracy as if we all have a shared definition of what it actually means. How do panel members define it? Senator Patterson, I'm not sure if that's one you want to tackle.
Yeah, I think a democracy is, consent of the people who are governed. Ultimately, the future about our country should be decided by the people who it affects, and they should have a say in the future of our country and the direction that we go in. There are lots of different ways to give the expression to that. There are lots of different ways to implement that, and different democracies around the world have different parliamentary and presidential and executive systems to do it. But ultimately, the core element of it is that people decide the future of their own country.
Question for our audience. What is the risk to our democracy that concerns you most? So again, if you want to jump onto Menti and respond to that, we look forward to seeing what you think. Helen, I will put a similar question to you. What's the biggest risk to Australia's democracy, and does your community raise these issues with you?
Well, thank you very much, Tom. Thank you, Sophie, Grant, Mike, for the opportunity to be here today, and I acknowledge Her Excellency and the Speaker of the House, my parliamentary colleagues, and everybody who's on. I think the greatest risk, and certainly what people talk to me about, is a sense of a power imbalance about who has influence over our democracy, who gets a say, who doesn't, the impact of big money in politics. Absolutely, Senator Patterson, your point around misinformation is absolutely true and threatening. When we see a report such as this that the Mackinnon have produced around an erosion of trust, in my mind, it picks up on many elements, the points that I've just made. But in addition to that, some of the ways that our democracy is exercised, the impact of political donations, the impact of lobbyists. I think when I consider the great work that the Speaker is doing and Her Excellency is doing around civics education, I would add to that that we need to practice our democracy, that we actually need to make sure that if we're trying to establish fairness around influence, then not only do we have to allow people to have a say, we need to be curious in listening to what people have to say. When I think about some of the issues we're having right now with social cohesion and the message from the Prime Minister about dialing down the heat, we need to dial down the heat in our everyday conversations about our democracy as well. So curiosity, kindness, absolutely, in listening, I think is critical. But for me, the power imbalance, the perception of power imbalance, it's why people like me on the crossbench and many others in across our nation are calling for reform. When it comes to lobbyists, we've seen the government implement new legislation around political donations reform. I'm not entirely comfortable with that. I think that while I welcome some greater transparency around donations, while I welcome some restraint around the amount of money that can be donated, I have serious concerns still around the power of incumbency, the problems that new players have, and I don't think we have addressed yet having an equal playing field, a level playing field, for people to participate in their democracy when it comes to actually running for and having the chance of succeeding at elections.
Thank you, Helen, and really appreciate the work you're doing and for joining us today. I'm going to ask Benson a quick question before we go to audience questions, but please do keep putting your questions into the chat. Benson, you've engaged in the democratic system in Australia in a variety of ways, including as a political candidate running at the 2025 federal election. What did that experience tell you about the state of our democracy?
Yeah, no, thanks, Tom, for the question. I think, I want to start with a little bit around the motivations for why I decided to put my hand up. And it was on the back of serving as Australia's Consul General and Senior Trade and Investment Commissioner based out of the US. The first thing for me was really the events of October 7th was a significant trigger for me, and more importantly, of actually what transpired on the steps of the Opera House, and then the subsequent feedback and insight from community here in McNamara, which is the seat that I ran for, talking about community safety and the rise of anti-Semitism. The second motivator for me to put my hand up was the referendum, the outcome of the referendum. And regardless of which side of the equation that you fell on, I believed that I could bring a path forward or support a path forward that would really provide a sense of unity and connection, that bridge in regards to the ongoing mission of reconciliation and relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. So I put my hand up and ran for the seat of McNamara in the city of in Melbourne, and it was actually quite I guess a rude awakening in regards to the challenge that public facing and public servants have with the public. And so my posters, I know this is a very kind of common story across politicians, but my posters were defaced, quite interestingly, from the National Socialist Alliance, which stuck posters of Australia for the White Man on my posters across a number of the suburbs here that McNamara crosses over. And then also from the other side of politics, we also saw my posters being defaced with Hitler moustaches and swastikas as well. And you know, it really showed the ugly side of what it means when you put your hand up and put yourself out there to stand for something. And it made me at the time really reflect on the beautiful speech around the man in the arena. And it made me question, well, what is the state of the arena today? And for me, it really took the form more of reality television, and what it has enabled to unleash kind of the fuel nastiness, and also spectacle over substance, which actually leads to kind of popularism. And I think that's the concern that I had through the campaign. Is that there was a very tribal approach to politics that only saw the colour, you know, blue, red, green, and didn't actually look at the person, didn't look at the policies, didn't look at the approach or the potential of leadership as well for the area. So, the personal attacks were one thing, but the thing that I didn't expect was, and I should have really, the impacts on my family. So my campaign office in St Kilda was routinely graffitied with stickers and not very nice things. And so I stopped bringing my young kids past the office, and also for fear of actually being followed home because we lived quite closely to the campaign office. So that was the very real, ugly reality of putting your hand up and standing for something and standing alongside others that stand for something, and that is a stronger future for Australia. And then on the other side, great support, wonderful people, met people that are not necessarily politically aligned, but they really want to see Australia step in as a mature modern democracy and lead from the front as a middle power. So it came with both sides, but I think the ugly side of politics is very real.
Thanks, Benson, and sorry to hear about the uglier side of politics that you experienced. The corflute in South Australia, they recently banned corflutes, which is a big change down there. So anyway, and Mackinnon is doing some important research on trying to address the barriers to people pursuing politics as a vocation, which is a separate program that we're running. I've got a question from Craig that a truly free press would be a pillar of democracy. How do the panel suggest we separate the real press from the commercial interests and influence of the owners of that press? I'm wondering whether Helen or Milton, you want to respond to that one?
Well, I think we're in an unusual territory now where the press is not just the traditional press. Everyone is a journalist of some sort now. And I think we need to understand that part of the decline of democracy has been the rise of social media. I'm not an anti-social media person by any stretch, but that is fueling some of the misinformation and disinformation. So it gets back to my essential point of teaching about democracy. When you look at the data, and your report highlights this in a really stark way, Tom, that 1/3 of people finishing year 10 this year have the qualifications to understand civics. So two-thirds of year 10, 15-year-olds, and they'll be voting in 3 more years, do not have adequate information about civics education in this country. So I think that says it all. Forget social media, forget media. If we don't understand as a nation and as a voting population the tenets of democracy, as James was talking about, the importance of the power imbalance, as Helen was talking about, we've got a real problem. So how do you overcome that? In my humble opinion, it's ensuring that we have a national curriculum, standardized, not talking about politics, but talking about our institutions, talking about the power of institutions and why they matter, how our laws are made and how our parliaments are structured.
Tom, could I jump in there and come back to what I think is fundamental critical thinking? And it's so important that we teach our kids to ask the question when they hear information or repeat information, how do you know that to be true? Where has that information come from? Who's holding the power? If you're reading something in the mainstream press, to make sure that we understand who are the media barons and what their I guess what their motivations might be. So again, while I think it's really important that we acknowledge that many people feel like they don't have a say, we need to be curious, teach our kids to be curious and be careful and discerning. And some of that's about slowing things down. And something I've learned in the last month or two is the importance of slowing things down and taking a step back to ask a question more thoroughly in my own mind. And certainly when it comes to understanding the influence of the media, we need to be curious about the motivations, the power imbalances, the ownership, and what the outcome is that a particular social media outlet or an individual or indeed a media baron may be trying to achieve.
Can I just make a quick comment on this, Tom? I understand the concern that people have about particular media outlets and an editorial line they might take or campaigns that they might run on issues. But I have to say, in the modern communications environment, I'm much more worried about the fact that there are literal neo-Nazis or people who are very thinly veiled neo-Nazis who have social media followings of hundreds of thousands of people in Australia and who can post a social media video that gets millions of views, openly stoking violence and hatred towards other members of our community. And they're not just doing so on marginal social media platforms that are unregulated or non-mainstream. They're doing it on platforms like Instagram, where they regularly providing this content and there are no consequences for them. Now, that is terrible on its own, but it is also having a radicalising effect on people in Australia, particularly young people. And we've already had one terrible terrorist attack in this country. I don't want to see the next terrorist attack in this country because someone else is radicalised by this kind of extreme content.
Thank you all for your answers to that. And I think it touches on the complexity of the challenge the democracy is facing. And three of our themes kind of fit into this: dealing with the information environment, social media reform, public interest journalism, but also making sure Australians have the skills and knowledge to navigate the modern information environment. So thank you so much for joining us today and for taking our questions. I appreciate your contributions to this debate and look forward to working with you on this campaign as it unfolds. And thanks to everyone for taking part by answering some of our questions on the Menti, which we will come to. What is the risk to our democracy that concerns you most? The highest score is coming in with concerns about disinformation, followed by the influence of money, lack of civic education, and on 4 votes foreign interference, 5 now. Again, really interesting feedback there. Disinformation, the information environment is obviously a key challenge for us all. Influence of money, again, that is coming. We'll speak shortly to the findings of our research, but vested interest and the influence of power and money is a key concern of Australians as well. Civic education goes to one of our key campaign themes. Can
I be very rude and just make one comment on that?
Of course, Your Excellency.
I agree with everything that just came up there. The one word I use a lot is about the collision of disinformation with apathy. And I think the notion of being relaxed or not worrying about our democracy and the apathetic nature of many in our community. I see the reverse of that when I see people highly engaged. But apathy and disinformation and that collision, for me, is a point that's getting bigger and bigger. And I'm not sure it's always covered by that entire spectrum of things we just saw on the chart. But in order to make people interested and engaged, as well as fighting off disinformation, I think is a job for everyone in public office to ensure that we understand that apathy is as dangerous, I think, as some of those more pernicious directed targets. And so how you build a sense of pride in addition to civic education by Australian citizens, which I see by most recent citizens when they take the affirmation of citizenship. And there's that moment where those that are already citizens or not citizens actually renew their statement of affirmation, that there's something really powerful that happens about an active, I care about the fact that this country has this, not just, and will push back against disinformation. So sorry to interfere, just I see that collision as becoming a much more intense period focus for people who really want to then undermine the very nature of what makes us strong.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Absolutely agree. And giving Australians a sense of agency is one of the aims of our campaign as well. So appreciate those insights. We'll now turn to, I think everyone will have seen that this morning, you may have seen reports on the ABC, but we released some findings from research we conducted last year. And I'm keen now to share some more details on that research with you all now. That research report is available on our website at www.democracycounts.org.au. The research is clear. Australia has built a democracy that's stronger than most. We Australians think highly of our electoral system. We value the Australian Electoral Commission. Our election results are trusted. Preferential voting means your vote still matters, even if your first choice doesn't win. And these are strengths worth protecting, and they are not small achievements. Our research backs that up. Most Australians think our political system is fundamentally sound. But the same research also tells us something important. The rules around politics have not kept up with the world we're living in, and when the rules don't keep up, deception and hidden influence tend to win. Released today is our Democracy Counts research, based on the foundational work McKinnon commissioned in 2025, a nationally representative survey of over 4,000 Australians, alongside qualitative research with 139 participants. The first finding is about trust in politicians. The numbers are stark. While many in this room today have strong relationships with politicians, and apologies to those who have joined us today, but many of you have strong relationships with politicians across the divide and know them to be decent people with a strong desire to create change for good. Unfortunately, that understanding is not shared. 76% of Australians think politicians are mostly focused on short-term gains and re-election rather than addressing long-term challenges. 72% think Australians serve themselves and vested interests rather than the public. And just over half don't think politicians understand or represent the interests of people like them. This view cuts across age, geography, and party affiliation. It's the mainstream view of Australian democracy right now. And it matters because trust is the foundation of a strong democracy. The second finding is about information and the environment people are trying to navigate. Online, misinformation moves faster than facts. Platforms benefit from distortion and outrage. Major platforms like Facebook and X have wound back most of their content moderation. Australians are being fed a diet of sensationalism and polarisation, and they are 13% think people should be able to say and share whatever they want online with no limitations at all. The overwhelming majority of Australians already accept that some accountability on these platforms is reasonable to expect. In many ways, the public is ahead of where regulation has got to. The third finding connects these two. The next generation is coming of age in this environment without the tools to navigate it. Civic scores are at their lowest since testing began in 2004. Young Australians are consuming enormous amounts of political content, but without the critical skills to evaluate what they're seeing. That's the picture. Trust in politicians is badly damaged, the information environment is broken, and a generation is coming through hungry to participate, but needing knowledge and skills to do so. The rules have not kept up, and that's what we need to renew. But our research shows that Australians don't just recognise these problems, they want specific, practical reforms to address them. On civics and media literacy, 85% of Australians say we need more education about Australia's preferential voting and political system. We need more civics and media literacy education in our schools so young Australians understand how our democracy works and can think critically about what they see online. On truth in political advertising, 81% of Australians support legislation requiring political advertisements to meet standards of truthfulness. Only 5% oppose. In a country that feels divided, as Australia does right now, 81% support with 5% opposition is about as close to unanimity as you'll ever find in polling. Australians are tired of campaigns built on attack ads and spin. If parties receive public money to campaign, there should be a basic standard. Tell the truth and show your plan. On lobbying reform, 67% support a 5-year ban on politicians becoming lobbyists after they leave office. Only 8% oppose. Australians expect to be made decisions to be made in the public interest, not shaped by privileged access and behind closed doors influence. Stronger lobbying rules restore confidence that government works for people, not just those with the right connections. On social media accountability, 67% support the government establishing an independent agency to track and remove disinformation and foreign interference from social media. 64% support a tax on large social media companies to fund public interest journalism, with only 10% opposed. And I want to be clear, just picking up on some of the discussion today about what this is and what it isn't. It's not about policing opinions or censoring debate. It's about stopping deliberate deception and covert influence so that voters, Australians, can make up their own minds. What I want you to take from these numbers is not just the majority support for each of the reforms. It's how small the opposition is. These aren't contested positions, they are mandate. Australians value their democratic system, but many are not convinced that it's in practice. That gap between principle and practice is what Democracy Counts is seeking to close. Practical reforms, renew the guardrails, reach for higher standards, enforce them independently, ensure voters get honest information. Communities get decisions made in the public interest. Young Australians get the tools and confidence to participate and be heard. The public is ready, the reforms are popular, and Australia can protect what works and renew the rules for the world we're actually in. Democracy is not a passive inheritance. It must be actively sustained. This research shows Australians understand that, and they're ready to back the people who will make it real. So having had Her Excellency the Governor-General share her perspectives, heard from McKinnon co-founder Dr. Sophie O, and after a great discussion with our first panel about what's at risk, and talk through the foundational research that we launched today, it's time to talk about the goals of the Democracy Counts campaign. What changes do we need to create? To create renewal of our democracy, and how will the campaign approach this challenge? For that discussion, I'd like to welcome the former Campaign Director for Democracy Counts, Executive Director of Democracy at McKinnon, former Premier of South Australia and Australia's current High Commissioner to the United Kingdom, Jay Weatherill. Joining Jay is Lizzie O'Shea from Digital Rights Watch, Claire Stutchbury from the Local and Independent News Association, Holly Rankin from Sentiment, and Catherine Williams from the Centre for Public Integrity. If you have a question for any of our panellists, please feel free to drop it into the chat. For this discussion, we really want to dig into what Democracy Counts is trying to achieve. We have 6 themes that we'll be developing policy and campaigning on: civics education, electoral funding reform, lobbying reform, public service independence, public interest journalism, and social media reform. And again, while we wait for your questions to come through, Your Excellency, I'll start with you. Could you talk us through how you and McKinnon developed these campaign themes?
Thanks, Tom, and thanks, everyone. It's lovely to see a whole lot of familiar faces speaking to you from London tonight. Well, we really started with the expert advice. So we had a series of well-established reports that had considered some of the challenges for Australian democracy, and we gathered that material together. And then we obviously the expert opinion was crucial, but because this is a democracy, ultimately the critical arbiter of what's crucial is the opinion of the citizens. And so we conducted both qualitative and quantitative research and took all of the things that the experts thought were important and run them through the lens of what the citizens thought were important. And it really led us to 6 different domains. We wanted to have the broadest possible agenda. So the agenda covered things like the public service, media, social media, politicians, political parties, and also the public service. So we had the broadest. We tried to have the broadest possible set of domains that were affecting the way in which our democracy behaved, but also looking at it from the eyes of the citizens, but also looking at those people that had studied Australian democracy and had analysed what its strengths and weaknesses were.
Thanks, Jay. We all miss you, but we're glad that you're representing our country in London. I know many people on the call today are coming to this issue from a range of different perspectives. We have a question about our campaign themes for you if you turn your device on. While folks do that, Catherine, I'll come to you. You're one of the country's foremost experts on integrity and transparency. How do we reduce that undue influence that has people so concerned?
Thanks, Tom. There are really two sides to this problem, and they reinforce each other. On one hand, we have political finance and the inadequate regulation of it. On the other, we have the revolving door between government and industry. Taken together, these two things create a system which sees certain interests able to access and influence the policy-making process in a way that ordinary Australians simply can't. On political finance regulation, Australia did see some changes and some improvements to transparency passed in Parliament last year. However, the new federal laws really fail to deal with the problem of undue influence, and they create systemic advantage for major party and incumbent candidates to the detriment of the ability of other players to participate in the system. Democracy Counts is also seriously exploring the issue of public funding of our elections, and we're really looking forward to being part of developing that policy proposal. The lobbying problem is just as serious. We acknowledge, of course, that lobbying does have an important role to play in the policy-making process. The problem is where there's insufficient transparency and accountability for the public to be able to have confidence that when public power is being exercised, it's being exercised in the public interest. Around 40% of registered third-party lobbyists previously held roles in government. Our current cooling off periods are far too short, and our sanctions for breach aren't structured in such a way to really incentivise compliance. We need longer cooling off periods, broader coverage, and an independent regulator with real enforcement power. The thread connecting all of these things is transparency. When the public can see who it is who is funding our politicians and who is meeting with whom in relation to what and when, we have a far greater chance of seeing outcomes that really genuinely are in the public interest. Sunlight remains still the best disinfectant. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Catherine. Holly, you gave the speakers lecture last year where you spoke about young people and how they're engaging and being engaged in democracy. What's the role of media and social media in both the problem in breakdown of trust and in the potential to create new solutions to build trust, especially among young people?
Thank you, Tom. And I'll be remembering that sunlight as a disinfectant, Catherine. I'm coming to you from Ngunnawal country here. I want to acknowledge the stories and songlines that run through this land. So Australians have lost trust in political leaders, as we know from today, and traditional media alike, but this is most true amongst young Australians. 74% of 18 to 24-year-olds in Australia use social media as their main source of news. And yes, this does include creators and influencers delivering news and political opinion. Most young people are relying on it as their main source, and I know that this can concern a lot of people on this call. It can feel alarming, but it does actually give me hope. So hold my beer as I talk through my ideas on this. The data also shows that young people value transparency, accountability, and integrity in record levels. Young Australians trust creators and influencers because they crave consistency, humanity, transparency, and community in a world that is constantly selling to them and selling them out, including political leaders, traditional media, and institutions that we trust to retain democracy. So I think young Australians aren't disengaged from politics and our democracy. They're just having the civic conversation somewhere else, and they're having it with people they trust and people they can count on. So it doesn't concern me that young people are having their conversation online, but what does really concern me is the lack of regulation of the digital public square itself, and quite frankly, who owns that digital square. The new public digital square is owned by 6 foreign technology companies worth a combined $6.5 trillion US. Their interests are corporate, not civic. Algorithms on these platforms are engineered to drive polarization and division because division drives engagement and engagement drives profit. So this is very bad news for democracy, and it means we no longer have a shared truth, and our public square is actively pushing us to the edges of it. So any leader or movement trying to build unity or shared logic right now is literally working against the rules of the ground they're standing on. But what does give me hope is that the values that young Australians hold of transparency, accountability, humanity, and truth are the same values that built our democracy in the first place. And lucky for us, the data also says that young Australians still believe in democracy. So as we go to renew our institutions, social media and digital media present us this really huge opportunity to renew our access to those institutions. So what's the solution, Tom? I think we have to rebuild the digital public square and bring democracy to it. And that means we need to regulate the public square, give younger generations a level playing field, not an information maze built for corporate profit. If we don't do this, I think we will fail to secure democracy for the next generation. We have to protect journalism in the public square, build frameworks that distinguish news from opinion, safeguard and grow spaces for journalism in its true form, and let the best of traditional media be amplified by the next generation of civic communicators. We need to give new media the tools to engage with civics, politics, and democracy at scale. When it comes to politics itself, how do we rebuild trust with younger generations through social and new media? We need to restore democratic integrity in our politics. If we don't regulate mis and disinformation and lies in political advertising, we aren't giving political leaders a chance to convince new generations that they are capable of forming a trusted relationship. Most importantly, though, we need to make politics a two-way conversation again. Young Australians are living in a digital public square, but for the most part, the institutions, people, and organisations that want to retain democracy are not meeting them where they are. If we want to make politics a two-way conversation again, I think we need to look at and consult with and listen to and have lead the first Australians of this country, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, who have been sharing stories across time and built culture around community and a two-way conversation since the very beginning. The question isn't whether young Australians will engage with democracy. The question is, for me, whether our institutions will join them while there's still time. And that's why I'm so excited about this campaign and everything it's setting out to do to make a two-way conversation happen again.
Thanks so much, Holly. And for anyone who didn't see Holly's speaker's lecture, I'd encourage you to jump on Google and maybe we can share the link in this chat. But it was an excellent lecture, and really excited to see I'm already seeing people connecting and building relationships and committing to collaborate on our chat, which is so good and part of what we're hoping to do. Also want to acknowledge we've got Peter Shergold online and former Prime Minister Turnbull in the chat. And we've had a really good shout out from Kate Chaney, who unfortunately has had to go and start doing democracy herself, but also acknowledge her attendance today and look forward to working with her. That brings us to Lizzie O'Shea from Digital Rights Watch. Lizzie, let's talk about the public square. The idea of removing mis and disinformation online seems insurmountable at times, but unless there's a way through that problem, it's hard to see how we actually create a trustworthy digital space. What do you think is the best approach?
Yeah, this is a great question, and it's great to be here, Tom, to talk about it. And I want to use the time to just build on some of the comments that other people have made in this event. So mis and disinfo, extremist content, algorithmic rabbit holes, these are all features of our online environment, and they pose real challenges to our democracy because for a functional democracy, you really need to have trust in institutions, as people have mentioned. We need to be able to find common causes across social divides, and we need to work out how to make collective compromises. And all of those things are more difficult to do because of the way in which our online spaces are structured. But I would argue, and we would argue at Digital Rights Watch, that these are fixable problems. We can bring this technology under our control, but that's only if we target the fundamental problem with our information ecosystem, which we think is the business models that shape these spaces. These platforms are focused on maximising engagement. They want you to stay on there as long as possible so they can extract more of your information. They can better profile you for advertisers and then sell your attention. And what drives that engagement is outrage, fear, content that generates an emotional reaction. That's the kind of content that is profitable. And so I think that we can't just focus on taking down individual pieces of content that are problematic one by one. By that stage, it's too late, and it really does create the risk of censorship. The goal should be to change the incentive structures that make the spread of things like misinformation so profitable and so effective as a result. So at Digital Rights Watch, we think there's lots we can do to address that. We need stronger privacy laws because personal information, that's the raw material that drives these business models, and we want to stop unfettered access to personal information. We need a digital duty of care, which would force companies to proactively identify harms when they're arising, disclose that, and then act on it. We also need algorithmic transparency so we can judge the decisions that are being made by these platforms and work out if they are justified in having a social license to operate. And that requires regulators that have strong enforcement powers that can access platform data and then have the authority to act on it and force companies to do so. Now, I did want to finish by saying that I got into this field of digital rights because I was concerned about the problems we're talking about, but I was also really excited about the immense potential of this technology to accelerate and strengthen our democracy. And I really do think that future is within our grasp, but we have to do things to decentralize how power is distributed in our digital world and put human rights at the center. And so what we're doing at Digital Rights Watch and what I think this campaign can contribute to is build a movement of engaged citizens who can take on some of the most powerful companies in human history and encourage politicians to do the right thing and then hold them to the account when they don't do that. And I hope you'll join us and join the campaign as well.
Thanks so much, Lizzie. We will continue to, I'm just acknowledging we're running a little bit behind where we should be, but keep your questions coming. They will form a part of our campaign, and we are recording all of this to make sure that we take into account your views. We have one last question for you. If you could take a quick look. Oh, sorry. Which campaign theme are you most interested in? Number one, civics and digital literacy, followed by lobbying reform, social media reform, then public interest journalism, electoral funding reform, and public service independence coming in at sixth. Clear favourite there with civics and digital media literacy, which is really interesting. And we have one last question for you. If I could ask you to take a quick look at your screen while you do that, I'm going to ask Claire. Media outlets like those you represent live and breathe the impact of social media and digital media every day. What will it actually take to boost public journalism in Australia?
Thanks for your question, Tom, and great to be joining you here from Nurrinjeri country. I think at an individual level, like there's a short answer to that and that is to actually support our local independent news media in your community. But today we're talking about that at a policy level. And I think in that space, there are three things that we need to do that work together. The first is holding platforms to account for their impact in the information environment. And social media companies have capitalised on news content while they've been hollowing out the industry that produces it. So the government is currently considering a levy on that revenue to counter the impact on public interest journalism. That's not a radical idea. It's in discussion at the moment, and it's just one step to address a power imbalance between external industry and its impact on the Australian public. And we're seeing some support from that in the McKinnon research that you've been sharing today. The second is fixing the tax treatment of public interest journalism. So right now, community newsrooms are doing vital democratic work, but they can't access deductible gift recipient status, the same status that allows people to donate tax effectively to charities. So there's no good reason for that. Recognising journalism as a public good in the Charities Act would unlock philanthropy, it would attract donors, and it would help build sustainable newsrooms in communities that currently don't have one. And the third is really sustained government investment through the News Media Assistance Program. The news industry is in transition at the moment, and in fact, the whole information ecosystem has shifted. And publishers need support, not just for kind of a one-year program, but for an extended period of time so that they can make that transition and actually meet the needs of communities to keep them informed with news that is relevant to their lives and news that serves. So we see that the green shoots are there in communities. We just need the policy settings to let them grow. And I think the Democracy Counts campaign, the potential of it to help is really significant. So I want to thank McKinnon and the team there for leading this work.
Thanks, Claire, and great to see you in Nurrinjeri country and look forward to joining you at the LENA Summit later in the week. Before we go to one or two questions from the chat, we'll just quickly see what people have to say about their favourite independent news outlets. Squiz Today, The Guardian, Cheek Media. The ABC is a common theme, as well as The Guardian. Crikey, local and regional news media. Claire, you'll be pleased to hear.
Community radio gets a shout out there. That's
Community
nice.
radio. And I see we've got Reece Kinane from the Community Broadcasters Association online as well. The ABC, Rest is Politics. Murray Bridge News, which is, I think, where Claire is joining us from today. Solstice Media, The Big Issue. Crikey. Excellent. Thanks all for your inputs. And just go to one question to this panel from Leon. Disinformation is no longer confined to election periods. It's persistent and often coordinated. The question from Leon is, do we need a positive legal duty on digital platforms to prevent its spread?
Lizzie?
Yeah, I think there's great potential in the digital duty of care that has been spoken about a few different times in various parliaments. What the content of that digital duty of care looks like will be the big question. But in other parts of the world, in places like Europe, there's proactive reporting on these kinds of issues, you know, the capacity to exploit networks of coordinated disinfo actors and what platforms are doing to address that, as well as lots of other kind of online safety issues and the like. Imposing those obligations positively on platforms, I think, would be a great step forward rather than waiting for harm to occur and post fact then trying to deal with the consequences, you know, even fines or accountability after that point may not be good enough. So that kind of dynamic we're seeing in other parts of the world where there's proactive enforcement of obligations, a requirement on platforms and other technology companies to disclose harm that they might know about so they can't turn a blind eye, and interrogate their own systems, the way they make money, the way they monetize content, the way they allow certain users to use their platform. These are all things that other jurisdictions are experimenting with. You know, most Australians don't realise that people in California have more data protection rights, have more privacy rights, have more digital rights than Australians, and Europeans certainly do. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. I think we can draw from lots of ideas abroad and create a much more robust information ecosystem for people to participate in.
Can I just add, Tom, to Lizzie's answer there, that political groups, especially within our kind of election campaign season, are the largest perpetrators of this mis and disinformation. And so our laws right now are actively encouraging political groups to spread mis and disinformation. It's perfectly legal to lie in political advertising right now. So we look at a lot of data and where this money and content is coming from, and it really is very political. It's very related to our democracy and politics here. So it's directly related to the interests of this campaign.
Thanks, Lizzie and Holly. Also acknowledge we have Peter Grester from the Alliance for Journalist Freedom on the line. Welcome, Peter. Thanks for joining us. Welcome any additional comments that you have on media freedom, and appreciate your support for the campaign and for joining us today.
Thanks very much, Tom. It's a real honour, a privilege to be speaking and to be joining you today, and especially sitting alongside the incredible panel that you've got here. As you and I have discussed, and as I know you've talked about through this session, we also believe that media freedom is a really big part of this whole campaign, a big part of the mission that we're trying to achieve. Alongside, I've spoken to Holly and Claire about some of these issues that we believe very strongly that it's not just about media freedom, but also about media ethics and standards that are a part of this process. One of the things that we recognise is the decline in trust in public interest journalism, and of course a big part of that is the loss of funding that Claire has already been speaking to. But we also recognise that the journalists themselves have some work to do to improve public trust and confidence. We also believe in expanding the definition of journalism to include a lot of the creators in the digital space. And again, Holly and I have spoken about that. So we're trying to set up some mechanisms to help improve our understanding of what journalism is, and how it can contribute to public debate in a way that develops the confidence and trust of consumers, but also does the job of holding politicians to account and facilitating public debate, particularly around election time. So we're very excited to be working with McKinnon on this, and very proud to be a part of this process.
Thanks, Peter, and thanks for the last-minute joining of the panel. Thanks so much to Catherine, Claire, Holly, Lizzie, and Jay, who I should say has joined us from London, where it's quite genuinely the middle of the night. Hopefully flat whites have been ferried to you to keep you going. It's been wonderful to have you all as part of the Democracy Counts launch. Democracy Counts will exist to boost the organisations already working in this space, including those who have joined us in this panel just now, and many of which are represented in the audience of this town hall. We believe that the stronger the Australian democracy, the more the campaign will achieve. We're building an alliance of organisations and civic leaders. We aim to equip organisations and enable leaders to amplify messages, host conversations, and through a many voices, one message approach, build political will and political momentum for change. Being a Democracy Counts partner means you can access campaign resources and research, as well as communication support to advocate for change and to protect our democracy. There are so many people who have dedicated their lives to Australia's democracy attending this town hall today. You represent the front lines of civic engagement, integrity, and the public interest, and I really thank you for being here. I know that you are time poor and under-resourced, and so your time is precious, and I appreciate you being here. You all know so well that our democratic institutions are the bedrock of so much that we value as Australians, our prosperity, our fairness, and our way of life. But you know as well that those institutions are only as strong as the trust that people place in them, as Sophie spoke to earlier. The reality we face is sobering. And as I shared earlier, our research that while Australians overwhelmingly value our democracy, they are losing confidence in how it's being run. They feel the system is working for the few, not the many. They see a flood of disinformation, a lack of transparency and lobbying, and they feel their voices are being drowned out by short-term political interests. We need a deep cultural shift to renew the trust Australians have in our democracy and our democratic institutions. Democracy Counts is more than just a campaign. We're seeking to build a long-term platform to organise that quiet, widespread desire for a better democracy into a powerful, non-partisan movement for reform. We aren't here to tweak the edges. We will seek to ensure that every Australian feels that their voice truly counts. This is the heart of Democracy Counts, and I hope that each and every one of you will be a part of this movement into the future. We want to work with you to amplify your voices, share our resources, and build a unified story that translates public goodwill into institutional reform. To make that possible, I'm asking you today to be the first to say, count me in. Please go to our website, www.democracycounts.org.au, and fill in the Count Me In form. By doing so, you aren't just joining a mailing list, you're joining a disciplined, coordinated movement that will drive the pressure needed for real policy change. I have always believed that when Australians come together with a shared purpose, there's nothing we can't achieve. This isn't about one side of politics or the other. This is about the rules of the game that allow us to thrive as a nation. We have a fair system, but we must work together to keep it that way. Let's remind Australians that the system only works if we show up and we shape it. Democracy counts, you count, and together we can renew the heart of our nation. Friends, that brings us to the end of this town hall. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks to our incredible lineup of guests and panelists, especially to the Governor-General, to Benson Saulo, to the Speaker, Milton Dick, to Helen Haines, Senator James Paterson, particularly on a busy sitting day. Thanks also to Jay for dialing in from London, and to Catherine, Claire, Lizzie, Holly, and Peter for your expertise and partnership. We're so thrilled to have launched Democracy Counts. Please don't forget to sign up and to say, count me in. Thank you and good morning.